Hello and welcome to EPC Policy Crossroads. This is the first episode of a new video series of the European Policy Centre that aims to take a look at what is coming in the next mandate of the European Parliament and for the next Commission, and more specifically, what should be on the EU's strategic agenda going forward. My name is Georg Rikles. I'm an Associate Director at the European Policy Centre, and I'm very pleased to be here today with two excellent guests for this first series. First of all, Bart Groothuis, who is an MEP from the Netherlands, former Cybersecurity Director at the Dutch Ministry of Defence, and of course an MEP that played a leading role in the negotiations on the CHIPS Act here in this House. And also here with me today, we have, I should say, our very own Pavel Sreboda, Senior Visiting Fellow at the European Policy Centre. The topic of today is economic security. This is a topic on which the EPC is developing a flagship project this year, because we think this needs to be high up in the EU's coming strategic agenda. Pavel is leading this project at the EPC together with myself, and we're looking forward to a conversation about what this agenda should entail, and also, of course, the challenges ahead. I wanted to start with you, Pavel. So you joined the EPC from other interesting, important functions to lead this project at the EPC. Maybe you could just tell us a bit more about why this project and what you think it should deliver, what you hope to achieve.
Yeah, thank you so much, Georg. So indeed, in September, when we got going on the project, we didn't quite expect that this would really become a central issue in the European debate. I think it's way overdue, because we should have had this debate probably about a decade ago at least. But of course, for various reasons, mostly that had to do with the fact that the EU has shaped it, its vision of the world according to its own image. We came very late to the game. And we are currently playing a catch-up. I mean, let's face it, the world has changed beyond recognition. It's no longer conducive to the type of multilateral collaboration on which our thinking had been based for decades. So what do? We have to adjust. We have to make sure that that the European model is resilient. But of course, we also need to retain a stake in degree of openness in the world, because Europe is an open economy. We are #1 trading partner of 80 countries around the world. So a lot of our prosperity depends on that. So we need to do something quite shrewd and intelligent, namely make sure that we are not overexposed. We have to reduce the areas of vulnerability, and yet we have to play on our strengths, because that's what our future prosperity depends on. So in a nutshell, that's what our project is all about. I think we reached the conclusion very early on that it requires a paradigm shift in policy making, because the economic security measures to date have been important, but they are basically patching up the situation as it is. What we need to do is to put European economic security at the front. So that should be one of the first questions that everybody asks when developing a policy blueprint. Otherwise, it's always going to be too late, and we'll always play the catch-up.
Excellent, Pavel. May I turn then to you, Bart? I mean, what Pavel is talking about is well, actually quite some fundamental shifts. He's speaking about a world that's changed beyond recognition. He's talking about the end of multilateralism as we used to know it. And he's also mentioning that we as Europeans, we need to play catch-up, update our DNA or our thinking on this. What would you point to that is so different in the environment now? Is it in the economic field? Is it strategic competition between China and the US? Is it that we have war on our borders? What is it that drives the need for a policy shift at the European level beyond sort of this open market thinking that we've had in the past?
Well, thanks for inviting me, but I'm a politician. Let me start with some polling data that we have from our party. If we ask people, but the Daniel Kahneman method, the two brains. If you ask people, what do you think that Europe should do? They would say, the internal market, some security, etc. But if you ask the other brain half, what should the European Union do? In images, what is the image that would occur to you? We did some polling, and the top 4 answers were Xi Jinping, Trump, Putin, and Erdogan. Which means there's a new game, and ordinary people understand this much better than we think. We are going from a rule-based order to a deal-based order, where strongmen decide who gets what in the world. And I think that people realize that all of our countries are small, too small to deal with a large broker such as China. In the Cold War, we've seen the Soviet bloc, which was economic not viable. And that's why we won. But now we're competing with the Chinese bloc, with the autocratic bloc, which is really successful. We're facing a new game, a new competition that we really need to step up. And I think that they are really pushing forward for weaknesses. And we have weaknesses when it comes to trade instruments. They really play the game to make everything turn into a weapon. So dependencies that we have, which I'm a free market capitalist, I'm an open market liberal, but that thinking has really put us to the brink of, the Chinese could do a lot to us. They could really harm us if they want to. And we recently saw that, my last remark, in Sweden, where Northvolt, a battery company, has been sponsored with more than 900 million from the European Commission. And for the anodes of the battery, you need graphite. And graphite is, of course, controlled by the Chinese. And what the Chinese actually did, they threatened us with export controls on graphite for large parts of the European Union. And they demanded that a Chinese factory was set was being built in Germany, next to our European Northvolt the factory. This is what entrepreneurs, this is what our future looks like if we don't step up our game, like you recently said. We need to have instruments to get more power into the bucket when we negotiate with the Chinese. And we have those. And it's called strategic indispensability, like the Japanese have been growing. For example, ASML, lithography. And I don't think that we leverage our powers enough. We should do more. But let me leave it to that.
This is excellent. But before I listen, may I ask you, did Europeans respond to that blackmail, the Chinese blackmail around graphite? Is this Chinese factory being built? Or do we have actually the political capacity and I guess the policy instruments to respond when China threatens us with export controls or holds back exports of graphites? I guess there are 2 ways of reasoning around this when they hold back export of graphite. Either that they'd rather prefer exporting batteries than graphite. They want to move up the value chain. But the other reasoning, of course, where economic security come in, is that they are looking to create dependencies. Yeah. But what is Europe's response? And is it adequate?
The best and adequate response would be to have an asymmetrical response. Mm-hmm. Not in the same field, but in another field, and communicate that there's an interlinkage. So we need a more grown-up response in the European Commission, and member states need to delegate much of that responsibility to the European level. Mm. This is the challenge that we face for the new Commission. There has to be a Europeanization. For example, on export controls. We have export controls that can hurt China, and we might convince them not to put export controls on graphite, and we might win this if we play this more eloquently and broader. We have a lot of instruments, but we're not doing it. And also because we look at this from a country-agnostic approach. So when we created foreign subsidies instruments, foreign direct investment screening, we now have export. There's like a dozen of instruments that we created, but it's country-agnostic. We don't look at where the real problem is coming from. Whereas I would say, if you objectively would look at where is the problem originating from, it's countries with an offensive espionage program directed against us, really have legislation to say our companies and citizens anywhere in the world should oblige with any request. They have an autocratic view. They are willing and able to project that in our backyard here in Europe. That's the number of countries. And it's the same what our voters said. Putin, Mr. Xi, Mr. Khamenei, those are the problem makers. And we have to have specific
on that list, you also mentioned
them.
President Trump, on that list of strongmen. And I think that's an interesting argument when it comes to economic security, and you say, okay, we have a country-agnostic approach. You're talking about export controls. Do we have a problem also with the US? I'm trying to push you a little bit on
The
on
US
that
does
one?
not have an offensive espionage program against us when it comes to intellectual property theft. In the 30,000 Snowden documents, not one example, not one. There isn't a sabotage program, not an autocratic view that is being projected in our backyard yet. So we don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with Trump.
Okay.
Sure, we have that. But like you said, and we discussed this before, Trump will divide Europe, not unite. There will, if I may quote you on this, there will be people who like him, the far right, far left, people who dislike him, and people who will start hedging, dancing with whomever is on the dance floor. The real unification, when it comes to European integration, is from outside threats, from China and Russia and Iran and North Korea, but especially China. Chinese trade threats are real, and all businesses feel that. This is the way we should unite and deepen European integration, is my stance. So Trump is different than Xi.
Trump is different than Xi. I think we can definitely agree on that. Turning to you, Pavel, now, because what Bart has set out is quite a strong call for Europe to do things differently, saying that what is needed now is taking this to the European level, Europeanizing our response to these big players, whether it is China, which you suggest is a security threat, or whether it is potentially Trump, which is putting, economic tools on the table for more power. Who's mentioning the idea of levying tariffs across European products. What would you say are the critical domains or the critical elements of focus for Europe in becoming a stronger actor in this paradigm of economic security as described it?
I would say what is critical is that we develop sufficiently strong leadership in strategic technologies. Because, we need to realize what's the future economy going to be all about. And that's where we need to invest our assets and resources, right? So we really have to use foresight in the best meaning of the term. That is, we have to prepare for the future that is awaiting us. And we have to invest in those capabilities, right? Because no one else will do it for us.
How do we do that? How do we invest in that? Because it's easier said than done. I mean, Bart spoke about gaining strategic indispensability on emerging tech. Yes, I'm all for it. But the question is, if it was easy, probably somebody would have done it already. What is needed? What is lacking at the EU level or member state level to...
I think what is lacking is three things. It's scale, speed, and directionality. So scale, because a lot of our funding instruments are fragmented, meaning, yes, you can get everything funded in Europe, but usually these are small pockets of resources which don't create much of a critical mass. So that has to change. We need to have clustering and augmentation of support for the strategic technology development. Speed, because by the time that's in the comparison with the United States, the Inflation Reduction Act. When you ask a business person, that's the most often quoted argument, that the ERA support comes almost immediately. In Europe, yes, you can find a funding line, but it will take you ages, right? By the time you find it, it's often too late. And then directionality, because you really have to focus on what is going to matter in that economy of the future, I would call it like that. So,
so pushing you on this,
we're getting close to that, because we have, the Commission has identified initially 10 critical technologies, then narrowed down the list. Japan has 11 of these technologies. So I think we are getting close to the point when we know what it is that will be decisive.
But may I push you a little bit on that? So, okay, the Commission has identified 10 technologies and 4 particularly critical ones. So AI, semicon, biotech, and quantum. Those are also on the US list. They're also on the Japanese list. Yep. I imagine they're also on the Chinese lists. And then you say we need scale, speed, and directionality. So let's say we have quite a promising ecosystem of, a lot in the Netherlands, by the way, of quantum startups in sensing and in computing, quantum computers. It's foundational technology for the future. what is needed to make these companies grow? Is it the lack of capital, or is it lack of skills, or what is it that the next Commission or the next EU iteration, but together with the European Parliament, need to put on the table so that we can help Europeans develop leadership in those four technologies?
Yeah, I would say it's mostly the ecosystem that is not sufficiently conducive to the development of these technologies. I don't think we have really walked the talk on what these technologies should be used for. So, for example, the future of the car industry, yes, we know it's important because a lot of the European jobs and GDP depends on the car industry. But we have not integrated the CHIPS roadmap into that. Namely, we haven't really taken stock of what the next generation sensors, what the high-speed connectivity.
And is there money on the table? Enough money on the table? You mentioned the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. When it came out, one spoke about 360 billion. Now, congressional figures say it's 700 billion. Goldman Sachs says it's 1.3 trillion.
Well, we definitely have a funding challenge, right? Let's call it a challenge, not a gap, because you can find money in different quarters, and you need to look more creatively also into institutional investors, into pension funds, not just the state coffers that we have traditionally.
Pension funds in Europe allocate 0.024% to venture capital.
Yeah.
In the US, that's 2.4. Do the math. It's 100-fold. So when we have scale-ups that want to grow to a unicorn, we have a problem. They go to the US. Why? Because one of the reasons is the institutional money going into venture capital. Just to comment on one thing, what we recently did was very cunning from the Parliament. We pushed for the Net Zero Industry Act to make sure that the CHIPS Act, Semicon, and the car industry can join together. There's a real new way of making sure that our Semicon experts in the world join forces with the automotive industry. So this is good news from Europe. It wasn't in, but sometimes it's good to have some politicians who push for it.
And it's good to hear that we are making progress. And what I like in what both of you are saying is that you're saying there's a dramatic situation out there. There's a situation of needing to catch up. You're saying that policies are going in the right direction. In the Commission strategy on economic security, they speak about 3 Ps. Promote, protect, partner. A lot of what you've just spoken about, I guess, falls in this promote baskets. We need to build these ecosystems. We need to focus on critical emerging technologies. But I want to pick up one word that you used earlier, or 2 words. You spoke about strategic indispensability. I think that is very strong 2 words. We've spoken a lot in Europe about strategic autonomy. And now comes in the new concept, strategic indispensability. I think we're borrowing it from Japan, which is because this is their economic security concept. I want to ask you, what do you put behind this? And I would also want to ask you, can you say us a little bit more about, from your viewpoint, what has happened around ASML? Because seen from the outside, ASML is the one company, tech company maybe in Europe, where we have some form of strategic indispensability. They are indispensable to producing the most advanced semiconductors, because they produce the machineries for that. Incredible story. We can't go into the details here, but they've sort of been caught up in a geopolitical game between the US and China. What's your take on this in the context of this being one of the most fundamental assets maybe we have this in technology race today in Europe?
Well, ASML as a world champion should become more of a world champion. First of all, it's not a Dutch company, it's a European company. Their supply chain is across. And if I see how ASML wants to be embedded inside the Netherlands, they want protection from Brussels. Because they feel that The Hague is not big enough for them. And I agree with ASML on that. And it's not just because of ASML. If you look at export controls on lithography, we see new export controls coming up on more mature chips. And it's not just ASML, it's also NXP, Infineon and Bosch. And others will become part of that discussion. And I think that more European nations, because of the new quantum and biotech export controls that will occur some point in time, which we hear from Capitol Hill, which we hear circling around here, let's just name it, we need export controls on a mature matter. I think what The Hague needs is very simple. It needs to shape that discussion. The current government is a right government, but it needs to not to turn its back on Brussels. If you want to keep ASML nationally, you have to do more here in Brussels. This is what the government formatting information needs to understand. And it's not just that; they need they need to have more instruments to actually push back on some of the things. And I think if ASML if you look at that company. What we could do is really help them in an ecosystem that goes far beyond the Netherlands.
Okay.
And I think that what the Dutch government needs, let me just name one thing more.
Yeah.
They need to have comfort. Comfort if we have export controls here at Brussels level. And I'm very much in favor of that. I tried to insert that in the CHIPS Act. Didn't really succeed, but at least there was a recital saying we welcome export controls from Brussels, which was great news. What they really need is comforting that their interest, the Dutch interest of ASML, will not be a victim of other interests, like the car industry in Berlin. They have to have a seat at the table, and their voice has to be heard much stronger than some of the other member states who do not have lithography inside their country's borders. So give the Dutch government more comfort that it's a national asset that they can control in Brussels, rather than saying, now we have a European, we do it out. They have to have comfort.
So it's a question of Europeans being able to come together in Brussels, somehow in an institutional structure where they can define a European interest together. And rather playing then, like we've seen in the past on trade, for instance, with China, if one wanted to take trade defense measures, you'd always have a delegation from a given country and saying, well, we're not voting for this in council, and trying to push own commercial or industrial interests in that trade. What you're saying is that what we need in Europe now is governments that are capable of thinking European and defining together common strategic interests. That's a big question of how to do.
Think about the countermeasures. The countermeasures should be here in Brussels. This is where you back up smaller countries, which are the geopolitical instability of the imbalance, I must say, between a large players from China and smaller ones like Lithuania or being economic coerced. But this is the place where you buff.
This is the place, this is where we can have scale to do it. But may I push that reasoning slightly further and to ask you this question, because what ASML has been hit by is export controls that are come out of US. The US have said, we don't want China to get the most advanced semiconductor manufacturing equipment. These are fundamental security concerns. So you, the Dutch government, have to impose this on this European company. At the same time, what this European company is facing then, of course, is a restriction of its capacity to export, its markets. It affects its global position in international value chains. You express some form of worry that this will move now from into the space of mature semicon. Yeah. So what is it that? So one thing is that this needs to happen at the European level, that Europeans collectively have agency. But in what direction would the policy go? Would the policy go towards more export controls, including on European actors, so that we cut off China out of our technological value chains? Or are we looking at just being in a better bargaining position vis-a-vis both China and the US?
Well, both, and I think it's stronger, it's broader even than that. If you would look at the entire world, is very worried about the Chinese military buildup, for one thing, to name just one thing. And in the Cold War, again, we had the coordinating committee, the COCO, which actually entailed also Korea and Japan and other nations not delivering materials and technologies to the Soviet bloc. Similar structures could be erected on the G7 level for my part. And I think that some countries, when it comes to lithography, the Dutch should be on the table. The European Union has to have a seat at that table. But it's about getting the partnerships, the three Ps, the partnerships with liberal democracies or people who at least do not adhere to the autocratic regime system. They have to find each other in this.
Okay. And then turning to you, Pavel, maybe for the last question before we wrap up, what Bart is going into here now is the third P, partnership. You speak about what happened during the Cold War, right after the Second World War, how one pulled together amongst like-minded and said, okay, we have a common effort to try to control most advanced technology. How do you see this partnership dimension of economic security? Who can we work with? What kind of structures? Any good examples of where we need to go further?
Yeah, I think it's critical because Europe is not the United States. Namely, over 90% of our GDP is trade, right? Yeah. So in the US, 27%, something like that. So we are in qualitatively different situations. And therefore, Europe needs to partner, needs to be a component of that economic security paradigm. And also, I mean, there are all these overexposures on critical raw materials, especially, right, where we desperately need to find alternative sources, right? We cannot rely on the existing ones only. And there's, of course, a lot of work going on, but all that has to be scaled up because you never know. I mean, the next period can bring some nasty surprises. So that's where partnership comes in as well. But I think we need to think.
Do we have that capacity today to work with partnerships?
Well, we would need to change the mindset because especially, I mean, with the like-minded countries, I think we have the right mindset. So the G7, I think we're working very closely with Japan, for example. A lot that we can learn from them, by the way, on this approach. Yeah. But when it comes to relationship with countries of the South, I think we need to have a completely different
all
mindset.
Right. Excellent, Pavel. That sounds like a lot of things to talk through for a future conversation. I'm afraid we are out of time for today, but it's been an excellent and stimulating conversation on something that clearly should have a big space in the EU's upcoming strategic agenda. But you running for elections again?
Yes, I am.
So you're coming back to drive this forward.
I am, and I'm able. I want to go. I want to step into the Trade Committee as well because the power projection of Europe is stepping towards that. Is going towards the Trade Committee. Currently, to be honest, we need a reform of the Commission in this respect. When it comes to supply chain, really it's GROW. When it comes to technology, it's DG Connect. When it comes to measures, it's DG Trade. We have to combine it. We have to make a more coordinating body, make a fist in the world. This is where the future, where the protection of our citizens will occur from the trade committees, our internal market, which is really putting something in the basket for power projection.
Brilliant. A lot of key words there to wrap us up. You mentioned reform of the Commission. That is actually an idea that Pavel has been pushing in this paper we co-wrote for the EPC, Europe's make or break moment, putting economic security, the heart of the EU's 2024-2029 strategic agenda, where what we call for is an economic security council at the European level. We don't have the time to go into those details today, but I think it's been an excellent conversation spanning many of these dimensions, including then the institutional dimension. On behalf of the European Policy Center, thank you, Bart, thank you, Pavel, for joining us, and thank you to all our listeners and viewers for this first video. There will be more to come. We will invite you to join us again for our next episode, which I can already announce will be on the future of the European Green Deal, because we see also that there are very dire trade-offs involved in all these policies. But thank you for now. It's been excellent. Stay tuned.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.